Now, typically the final boss is meant to be the game's hardest challenge. I mean, this follows pretty simple logic. I mean, why wouldn't the last thing you do in a game be the most challenging? And though they are sometimes tough in their own right, sometimes the basic enemies you come across on your way to them, well, they are even worse. Oh dear. So let's have a chat about them. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 video game enemies we hate more than the final boss. Number 10, Insect Swarms, Resident Evil 7. Now, frustration is actually kind of the point in some horror games. Even in titles with fluid, responsive controls, you're still meant to feel constantly on the back foot, so that you feel that one bad move or one wrong corner turned can make you lose it all. But you know what? The Insect Swarms in Resident Evil 7, well, they take this to an entirely new level. Being a gross house, housing gross people and filled with gross things, naturally the Baker house has a lot of bugs. The most annoying of them are the bug swarms, and while they don't do much damage as long as you're just not standing there and letting them attack you, they heavily obscure your vision, and most of your weapons can't harm them. The only way to be rid of them is with a flamethrower, and even then, you have to attack their nest if you want them to stay gone. This eats through your flamethrower ammo very quickly, and it's this ammo that you want to treasure like it's water in the desert. While at the bottom of this list, due to them adding to the game's overall theme of helplessness, it's no shock that fans hate these things way more than they hate the actual bakers. Number 9, the Marlboro, Final Fantasy series. Now, Final Fantasy loves to reuse ideas from game to game. Being a series whose every entry is fundamentally different from the ones before, it makes sense to have reoccurring elements to tie it all together, and this includes characters like the ever-present Cid, the names of spells, and indeed certain iconic enemies. But one that every fan dreads running into is the Marlboro. Now, this is a mid-tier enemy in most Final Fantasy games, but it's a rite of passage for newbies, and that's because newbies always fall foul of its most infamous ability, Foul Breath. Now, Foul Breath hits you with every status ailment in the game at once, instantly turning the flow of the fight against you because now you've got no idea how to play defense while you undo the damage. It's an infuriatingly ingenious wildcard in classic Final Fantasy's random encounter system, but you know, it's quite low on this list because, hated as it is, players usually only fall for that trick once. Unless you're profoundly unlucky, it will rarely hit you with the Foul Breath right away. And once they're wise to the game, most players will make getting the Marlboro off the board an immediate priority. Still, that hasn't stopped players from holding this tentacle nightmare demon in deeper contempt than most final bosses. Number 8, the Marauders, Doom Eternal. Now, the Marauders were an interesting idea for a Doom enemy. Lore-wise, they're sick as hell, being traitorous Night Sentinels who turned against the Order to serve the Khan Maker. Making these Marauders souped-up demon knights with the exact same training as the Doomslayer is an awesome idea. You know what, print it, run it, put it on a bloody billboard. But gameplay-wise, it's also an interesting challenge for the devs, since this makes the Marauders into essentially duplicates for the Doomslayer, having to fight a guy who knows how to fight back. It's just a shame that this is where the execution kinda trips up. Everyone who has played Doom Eternal hates these damn things. The reaction time demanded of the player is sometimes too tight compared to how devastating the consequences for missing it are, as the Marauder zips across the screen and can only be hurt at certain times. It also has attacks that can counter almost every tactic you employ, and getting hit once, especially on the higher difficulties, tears valleys off your health. The Marauder was a neat idea, but in execution, well, it just executed you too much, and led to the Marauder overshadowing the Khan Maker themselves for the most hateable thing in the entire game. Number 7, Birds, Ninja Gaiden. When it comes to the annoying flying enemies of the 8-bit era, most people think of the Medusa heads from Castlevania, and look, no one here is saying that they aren't one of the most annoying enemies in gaming, but people are forgetting the final form of the Medusa heads, and that is the birds from Ninja Gaiden. The secret behind what makes these birds so annoying is all about their placement. The devs seem to have taken a truly sadistic pleasure in putting these damn things in the exact spot where they can destroy your entire playthrough in one swoop. Whether over bottomless pits or when you're already surrounded by enemies, expect to get pelted in the head by at least one rat with wings. Now, of course, we know why this is. Ninja Gaiden started as an arcade game, meaning that its priority is to drain your quarters. But that's cold comfort when you're playing it at home, and Tweety over here has knocked you down a fire pit. And it isn't like getting out of the arcades made Ninja Gaiden any easier. If anything, the game's actually got harder from there. Number 6, Prometheans, Halo 4. What made the original Halo trilogy's combat so damn good was the carefully designed variety in the Covenant enemies. enemies. Every single foe had clearly communicated tactics that complemented the others so seamlessly that when you put them together in any combination, the fight would be very interesting no matter how you cut it. Unfortunately, Bungie made their departure from the franchise in 2007, meaning that Halo 4 was due to be shepherded by a new team, and with Halo 3 ending the threat of the Covenant, a new enemy needed to be introduced to keep things moving. Enter the Prometheans. Now, the problem with the Prometheans is that they just aren't as interesting as the Covenant, based purely on one factor. There's only one race. The Covenant was made up of tons of different alien races, leading to a lot of visual and mechanical variety, but the Prometheans all look the exact same, so it does get monotonous. Plus, when they aren't being boring, they're flat out infuriating to fight due to their cheap tactics, the worst of which are the teleporting ones that incessantly dog you throughout the battlefield, leading to a ton of cheap deaths. The Prometheans were an interesting idea for a different kind of Halo enemy, being a collective hive mind instead of a religious cult, but the art design and gameplay mechanics, well, just didn't measure up. Number 5. Invading players. Dark Souls. When it comes to picking the most infuriating enemy in Dark Souls, one definitely has the pick of the litter. Through the game's intentionally wonky combat combined with the difficult mechanics and clever enemy placement, Dark Souls' enemies are a cut above the rest, even over a decade later. But to be perfectly frank, all of them pale in comparison to getting jumped by a guy who's just way better at this game than you are. One of the many reasons Dark Souls is constantly online is because if you connect to the internet while playing, you open yourself up to invasions. This is when another player can come in and just wreck your absolute business. It doesn't happen nearly as often anymore as it did back in the game's heyday, but honestly, that's sometimes even worse. At the game's most popular peak, it happened all the bloody time, which meant you had a good chance of getting some overconfident newbie you could handily beat and move on, but sometimes you get a player who would just absolutely wreck you so much that you'd probably just be left there sitting watching that bonfire flicker as you respawn, just going, can I actually do this? There is a league of difference between me and thee, and thus I cry. In short, you're dead. And now, you feel really bad about it. Number 4, Cliff Racers. The Elder Scrolls 3, Morrowind. Sometimes an enemy doesn't have to be hard to fight, they just have to be really, really annoying. And Bethesda has gained something of a reputation for having at least one enemy per game that just grinds players' gears. Whether it's Fallout 4 and the mini-nuke super mutants, or the Slaughterfish in Skyrim with their stubborn as hell fast travel ruining aggro, but when it came to Morrowind, there was only one that could truly be classed as the worst, and that was the Cliff Racers. Traveling into Morrowind mountains will inevitably cause you to cross paths with the nation's equivalent to pigeons. They're annoying and, worst of all, they are everywhere. And like the Slaughterfish, they never leave you alone. Except these guys can fly, so it's even harder to be rid of them. And the cherry on top, of course, is the constant screeching noise they make. And when there's a lot of them, which there always are, you better believe that that sound gets real old real quick. They're not even the hardest enemy to deal with, and certainly not harder than the final boss, but these little freaks have cemented themselves in gaming history for being just so bloody obnoxious. Number 3. Tin Man, Castlevania Order of Ecclesia. The Igarashi Castlevania games prided themselves on their challenge. Starting with Symphony of the Night with its brutal difficulty spike in the second half, the handheld Castlevania games that followed did their best to make you fight for it. And hoo boy is that ethos embodied thoroughly with Order of Ecclesia's Tin Man. Ranking higher on the hate-o-meter than Order of Ecclesia's Dracula fight is quite the accomplishment, as that fight is easily one of the hardest and cheapest in the entire franchise. But at least you only have to fight Dracula once, as there's only one of him. Neither luxury is afforded to you with the Tin Man, however. This late game enemy hits hard and very fast, easily catching up with you whenever you try to get even the smallest shred of distance. They're made of metal as well, so most blade weapons will do nothing to them, and they're constantly spinning an axe in front of your face that takes entire chunks off your health. Oh, and if you do manage to get its health down, it starts shooting a machine gun at you. Sorry, how is this fair? But at the very top of this mini list as to why this enemy is so infuriating is that Dracula's castle has entire rooms filled with these bloody things. No escape and no mercy. That, unfortunately, is the Order of Ecclesia way. Number 2, the Flame Chariot, Elden Ring. It's hard to pick just one enemy from Elden Ring that is the most infuriating, at least when you rule out the bosses. Every enemy in this game can, and most likely will, kill you at least a dozen times. But the one enemy that most fans agree on can take a long walk off a short pier is the Flame Chariot. The main problem with these things is that killing them is tricky, because you have to find some way to get to the driver behind the chariot to backstab stab them, and all the while you're getting either run over, doused in fire, or both. The only way to avoid all of that is to pull off a plunge attack from high up, but the odds of you coming across the perfect spot to do so are slim at best. Oh, and even if you do manage to kill them, you have to book it immediately or you'll die from the chariot violently exploding. Cool. And number 1, Cazadors. Fallout New Vegas. At the beginning of New Vegas, assuming you actually take the time to talk to the people of Goodsprings, you're told under no uncertain terms that taking the short, straightforward way to New Vegas is a good idea. And say hello to the reason why. Or technically the second reason, because that way, be filled with death claws. No. But yes, Cazadors. They're here, they're loud, they're vibrant, and they bring death swiftly. Because let's face it, the Cazador is the true hardest enemy in New Vegas, and they are wasps the size of your torso that move fast, hit hard, and leave a devastating poison that is almost guaranteed to kill you if the constant stinging doesn't get to you first. They're hard enough to deal with on their own, but unfortunately these nightmare beasts usually travel in packs. Your only saving grace is that they're incredibly territorial and tend to stick to mountainous areas. So if you run afoul of them, chances are you were wandering around some place you shouldn't have been in the first place. A lesson that will swiftly and brutally be imparted on you every single time you come across them. No boss in New Vegas inspires as much instinctual terror and raw hatred as the Cazador does. And there we go, my friends. Those were 10 video game enemies we hate more than the final boss. I hope that you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comments section below. As always, I've been Jules. You can go follow me over on X or Instagram, where I'm at RetroJ, but the O is a 0. Hope to speak to you soon. As always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. Never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.